Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses that we must correct. It's about taking back control of our security, our borders, and our future. There are some who say there's no need for a comprehensive plan. They believe we should wait it out in the hope that the United States will return to normal, that the good old days will come back. But hope isn't a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy.
That was Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking on Sunday, echoing concerns shared by European leaders. Well, as Europe grapples with an increasingly unstable world and increasing uncertainty about the United States, European leaders are starting to act. Today, French President Emmanuel Macron and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk met in northern Poland to discuss ways of deepening defence cooperation in response to Russian threats and shifting US priorities. Tusk will cover a closer military coordination, including Poland's potential closer cooperation with France's nuclear deterrent, as well as joint European defence projects. Well, their meeting comes as European leaders try and balance two realities: strengthening the continent's capabilities while still relying heavily on the United States. So how far is Europe really moving towards strategic independence from the US? And what are the chances that rhetoric will become reality? Well, Stephen Everts is the director of the European Union Institute for Security Studies. That's the EU's in-house foreign and security policy think tank. Welcome to DW. So many of these discussions, so much of this discussion has arisen out of the two Trump presidencies. But are Europe's defence weaknesses all of Donald Trump's making?
No, not exclusively. It's a longer story, and I think your questioning is right. For years, we've been discussing amongst Europeans on how we can get stronger in foreign policy, how we can get stronger on defense, and lots of plans were mapped out over many, many years. But of course, the return of Donald Trump has put all this on sort of steroids. Has put an accelerator on a lot of these discussions, because we know we have to be able to take care of our own defense with a much greater degree of uncertainty over the role of the United States. Now, if you say that kind of sentence, you have to say, okay, but how are we going to organize ourselves for that? And you have seen that, of course, in the last year or two, there's been an acceleration of defense spending in Europe. Money is going into the sector. But that's not enough. Right? You can perhaps spend more on defense, but it doesn't automatically translate into more capabilities. And this is the challenge that Europeans now face, that they are spending more, but they also need to collaborate more. They need to integrate more in order for that extra money to really deliver more security. And another thing that we need to do is also train more together and to train for contingencies as Europeans, where perhaps the role of the United States is not going to be the same as the old defense plans in the past. And I think the two clips that you showed there of Mark Carney, Canadian Prime Minister, and the visit of President Macron to Poland, they tell the same picture, right? They tell the same story. Much less certainty about the United States. It's changing under Trump. But Europeans acting and finding answers. And I think that's one of the things that will really guide the discussions in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, so sort of two questions in one. Do you expect this European enthusiasm for strategic independence, do you expect it to continue beyond the Trump presidency? That's the first part. And do you expect the talk and the spending to manifest itself in increased capabilities, as you questioned in your first answer?
Excellent question. So on the first one, let's take them one by one. The first question, yes, I think there are changes taking place in the United States. They go deeper and wider than the personality of Trump. I mean, he's a larger-than-life political figure, but it would be an analytical mistake to limit everything just to the analysis of the person of Trump, and then maybe to say, well, let's wait until the midterm elections in November and everything can look very different, maybe better after that. And so we in Europe, we don't have to take all these difficult things that we're now discussing, investing in our security, putting more money into it, but also, organizing ourselves politically for that, and maybe how to get rid of our tech dependence. And there are many, many things we have to do for this strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty or whatever label you want to put on it. It's a tough thing to do. It's maybe tempting to say you don't need to do that because after Trump, things could go back to they were perhaps before. That is an analytical mistake, in my view, and therefore also a political mistake. We should not expect the United States, even in a post-Trump era, to look like the old United States of the past. So that's question number one. I think I'm relatively clear about that. On the question number two, here the jury is out. I think it is clear that Europeans are spending significantly more on defense in the next 10 years. If all the plans are implemented that are now being talked about, this will mean Europeans spending 1 trillion for their defense. So that is a lot of money. Europe can defend itself, can deter Russia on those kinds of numbers. But what it needs is more integration of the defense sector. What you don't need is just for 27 countries to increase their national defense spending and these little bonsai armies that we have to get a little bit bigger. No, what you need to do is really an effort to spend better collectively and to, for instance, to make sure that these joint defense projects, to work on air defense is on everybody's mind these days. Air defense, you can see in Ukraine how much that is needed. How to build an integrated air defense system for Europe, how to build an air shield, how to work on a drone force, how to work on satellite communication. In all these areas, Europe today is very weak. Okay. We rely a lot on America for that. But there are also answers to this. There are European companies that are working on these deals. Ukraine is working on these issues, and we have a massive interest in working with Ukraine for that.
Okay,
but it requires a better.
Let's leave that. Let's leave that there because you've outlined that very well, and I do want to get through a fair bit. So that's the medium to long term. Let's talk about now, and you've written that it is painful, your word, that Europe is on the sidelines of America and Israel's war against Iran. You commend European leaders for their stance that the war in Iran is not our war. So why then do you believe that Europe should play a more active diplomatic role in solving a war that it didn't start and wants no part of?
Absolutely. I think we have a slogan, we have a position. This is not our war, but we are affected by this war. The continued closure of Hormuz is affecting Europeans massively, higher energy prices and the rest of it. And I detect that there is a diplomatic void. The US-Iran negotiations did not lead to a breakthrough. Let's see if they get better for the second time. But I don't hold my breath for that. I mean, the gap between the parties is enormous. There's enormous mistrust. And Europe actually, not so long ago, it was Europe leading the international negotiations on Iran. Remember the nuclear deal? Still one of the most successful evidence of multilateral diplomacy in the Middle East. So I think it is necessary. It's also feasible for Europeans to be much more proactive on the diplomatic front, not just to state our position. We don't want this, we do want that. And then to wait for others to take actions and then we comment on this. No. Why doesn't Europe build a diplomatic alliance with the countries of the Gulf, with the countries of Asia that, like us, want to reopen the Strait of Hormuz? And eventually we have to negotiate with Iran. The idea that we're going to force, with military means, the Strait of Hormuz to be open, I have my doubts on.
And do you see that Europe-led diplomatic effort with input from the Middle East and from Asia, do you see that as being separate from or in alignment with the current negotiations being mediated by Pakistan and Egypt?
No, I think it's complementary too. But I think the gap between the US and Iran and the distrust and the whole story of what happened in the last few weeks and months points to the need for an additional track as well. I mean, remember, Iran was negotiating with the United States when this war started. So they obviously feel, a lot of distrust about the reliability of any U.S. commitment. So those talks can continue, but I think it's probably more fruitful and more promising if there were a broader coalition surrounding that of Europeans, of Gulf Arabs, of Asians, of other international partners that say, listen, we have to find a negotiated outcome to end this war, to reopen Hormuz, and to deal with all the other outstanding issues. This has worked successfully in the past. Why do we believe it cannot work again?
Let me throw one big reason as to why it may not work this time. Because you're talking about a parallel process with an American president who actively disdains a Europe, who has labelled Europeans as NATO freeloaders, who has excluded Europeans from meaningful talks about the Ukraine war, which is on Europe's own doorstep. It is unlikely that such a president would look at other complementary, as you say, but I suspect he would see it as competitive diplomatic efforts to solve the war that he started and wants to walk away from.
I hear you. It's true also that Donald Trump says sometimes diagonally opposing things in the space of 10 minutes. So at the beginning of the press conference, he says Europe is useless and pathetic. And on the other end of the press conference, Europe has to solve this problem in the Strait of Hormuz and send naval assets to break open. And so there's a range of views that he expresses. I'm mainly interested in defending European interest per se. And I think we will have more of a chance to defend those interests in the economic space, but also in the security space, if we don't just wait for others to take decisions, don't just comment on what other people believe, but if we act ourselves as well, and we do so with partners. Because Europe is often, under pressure and we struggle. I don't deny that. But we're not alone. We're not alone. There are many others who, like us, are a bit terrified at the dynamic that they see between the US and Israel and Iran, and this war still not being on a path towards de-escalation, still not. So let's pool forces with them.
All right. If the world that you seek materializes, clearly it's not going to happen overnight. So is there therefore a danger that Europe ends up caught in between? Weakened links with the US and too weak to act in the world alone?
There's a challenge. And again, I'm not going to pretend that there isn't. If these things were easy, they would have been solved already, and they're not. But I think it is possible for Europeans to go back a bit more to the core defense issues, which more relate to the Russia-Ukraine story we touched on earlier. I think it is possible for Europeans to scale up their deterrence vis-a-vis Russia, to do that with Ukraine, because Ukraine is innovating like crazy, and we have every interest of working with them to do so, that we can really take care of much greater part of our own deterrence, and therefore not having to rely on the United States to the same extent. In your very clip at the very beginning, the word nuclear was mentioned. That is precisely also the area where Europe is furthest away, of course, from replacing in any possible way the United States. There's France, there's the UK, but that doesn't, equate to the kinds of nuclear capabilities that the US offers. Now, in the US, if you listen to some voices, maybe not only Mr. Trump, but there are others that say, yes, we would sign up for that. We would sign up for a scheme where Europe takes care of its conventional deterrence, and the US stays in the game when it comes to the nuclear deterrence. And I think that's the track we are on, and I think that's the track that is feasible.
Okay, much to think about there. Thanks for talking us through that. Stephen Everts from the European Union Institute for Security Studies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.